Hi everyone. Recently I've run across a macro for SPSS for carrying out multi-level mediation and also moderated multi-level mediation. This macro is called MLmed by Rockwood. And so I thought what I would do is put together a presentation demonstrating how to use this macro to test several 1-1-1 models. And so if you want to obtain a copy of the macro, you can go to this link right here. That'll take you to this web page right here. And on that web page, you'll find a box for download the macro. And then there's a user's guide right there. When you download the macro, you'll find that it will be in a zip file. And there's actually a syntax file and a macro that can be used to create a point-and-click interface just by installing that macro. So I'm actually going to focus on demonstrating the use of the point-and-click interface for performing multi-level mediation. For this set of demonstrations, we're going to be using data that is associated with this article right here called Linking Colleague Support to Employees Promote a Voice, a Moderated Mediation Model. We're not going to be focusing on the issue of moderated mediation, but just mediation involving level 1 variables. But this article is published at +1. It's open source. And if you go to this link right here, you can easily download a copy of it. And the data is provided in the supporting information at the same place. I went ahead and just kind of created a separate data file just so you can quickly link on that and download the data. But the data is on 162 employees who are nested within 51 work teams. So let me just note that before we get started, that I will make the link to Nicholas Rockwood's page available underneath the video description. In addition, I will include this link right here to the data, as well as a link to this PowerPoint presentation. So the first model that we're going to test is basically includes mediation both within and between groups, or in this case within and between work teams. So the variables that we're going to be using were all measured at level 1, and that's why you see 1-1-1 given right here. If we had a 2-1-1 model, then basically what that would mean is that the first variable, our X variable, was measured at level 2, and then your mediator and outcome variables were measured at level 1. So we're basically going to be focusing in this video on 1-1-1 models and some of the options that are available with the macro. So for this case right here, at level 1, we have measurements of perceived colleague support, perceptions of psychological safety, and promote a voice. So again, all of these were measured at the individual level within the work team. So in this model right here, we're going to test whether the effect of colleague support on promote a voice is mediated by psychological safety, and that's level 1, that's occurring within the work teams, and then level 2, this is capturing that mediated effect as it occurs between work teams. Now, before I open up SPSS and walk you through it, I thought I would give you a couple of screenshots just to see what we're going to be looking at. So first, since I've installed the macro, if you go to Analyze, Mix Models, and then you'll find the macro, MLmed, for multi-level mediation. And when you click on that, this box right here will open up. And the first thing to note up here where it says Data Set, what you're going to put is the name of the open data set. So it's kind of small right here, but if you open up the PowerPoint file, you'll see it. You'll see it says Dataset 5 right here, and that's the name that we're going to put where it says Dataset. So don't put the name of the actual data file. In this case, the data file is called prvoice.save. Don't put that in there. Just put Dataset 5, and that's what it is right there. Make sure you capitalize your S there as well. So and the reason why it's dataset 5 is because when I was putting this together, there were several data sets that were open, and so there was dataset 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I had a lot open. Next, right here, you'll see it says folder, and what you're going to need to do is to point the macro essentially to a folder that's on your computer or on your drive. In this case right here, you don't see it, but it's basically pointed at my downloads folder. That just happened to be where my data was. And I'll walk you through doing this in just a second. But basically, once you've done that, once you've pointed the macro, then it's pretty much ready to go. Some other things to note, too. Down here where it says estimator, you've got REML for restricted maximum likelihood. There's maximum likelihood. When you're testing your indirect effects, it's basically utilizing a Monte Carlo resampling procedure. So that's why this down here says Monte Carlo samples. And then this is basically the default confidence interval when you're testing your indirect effects. Right here where it says cluster, this is where you're going to move your level 2 identifier. So in this case, it's team code. My X variable is colleague support, or the perceived colleague support, measured at level 1. Psychological safety, which was measured at level 1, that's our mediator. And then promotive voice, which is our level 1 outcome variable. So next, when you open up under random, you'll see that there are some defaults that are given, and basically the main one that you want to make sure that you have clicked is this one right here. The other the defaults for M2 and M3 in this particular case, that would be useful if you had 2 or 3 mediators, but in this case leaving the defaults is fine because there are no second and third mediators that are specified in the model. But do make sure that this is definitely clicked right here. When you go under fixed effects, you're going to want to make sure that this is clicked. And for this particular model, since we're including within and between effects, we want this, and to be clicked in addition to the remaining defaults. So here's the data set opened up in SPSS. Once again, up here, where now in this case, this is PR voice, but I went in and saved the data set under a folder in my desktop. But you can see right here it says data set 1 in this particular case. It happens to be the case that I only have one data set open. So I'm going to go to Analyze, go to Mixed Models, MLmed for multi-level mediation. You can see by default it's set up at data set 1. So I don't need to change that, but I do need to specify the location of or specify a folder, and I'm just going to basically pick the folder that contains the data set that's saved in a folder on my desktop. So I'm going to type in C : users, then backslash, then my name. It just happens to be there's Mike Krausen with a space in between. Backslash the desktop. Then backslash, then the folder name, which happens to be PR Voice. That's the name of the folder on my desktop. And then within that, I also have another folder, which is data. So I'm just going to type in backslash and then data right there. So next, I'm going to move my team code variable over to the clusters box. I'm going to move the colleague support variable to the X box. I'm going to scroll down and move psychological safety to M1. And then scroll down a little bit further, and you're going to find promotive voice, which is going to go to my Y box right here. Under fixed, you can see it's already set up where we have within effects, X is clicked, and then the between effects, these two are clicked as well. We'll click on continue. Under random, you can see the default's already given, and we just want to make sure that this is clicked. Basically, what's happening is that the paths within and between that are being calculated involve essentially 2 multi-level regressions. So we do need to make sure that we are allowing the random intercept for the mediator variable at level 1, the intercept at level 1 to randomly vary for the mediator variable. So that's what's going on. So we'll click on continue and then on OK. And then we end up with our output. So in our output, you'll see under fixed effects, you'll see that we have the model predicting the mediator, which is psychological safety. You'll see that we have within effects and between effects. And basically, what's going on is that the colleague support variable that was measured at level 1, it is centered within cluster, and that's what's used to estimate the within effects, and then the mean is reintroduced at level 2 to estimate the between effects. So you have basically the regression coefficient within and between, Both of those are positive, and we also see that they are statistically significant. Down here, we have the outcome variable being promotive voice, and so this is a second multi-level regression model. And in this case, we have the within effects, basically the centered colleague support and psychological safety variables, and then the between effects are the means reintroduced for both of those variables at level 2. So you can see we have the regression coefficients within. Both of those happen to be non-significant. And then between, you can see that we have non-significant effects for both of those variables as well. When we scroll down, we get the random effects from the two multi-level regression models. So the first model, where we had psychological safety as the outcome variable at level 1, you can see that we have the residual estimates at level 1. That's the variance estimate and significance tests. And then the random effects estimates, this is the variance of the intercepts for the psychological safety variable, and you can see it's not significant. For the second multi-level regression, where we have promotive voice being regressed onto colleague support and psychological safety, this is the variance estimate at level 1. You can see it's significant. And then the variance estimate at level 2, and it's statistically significant. You also have the random effect key that's given right here to better make sense out of these numbers right there. When we scroll down a little bit further, you'll see the direct effect within for colleague support, and then between for colleague support. So those are the estimates and significance tests that are given. You also see we have confidence intervals for them. And then down here we have the indirect effects. So the calculated within indirect effects and between indirect effects. So the within indirect effect for colleague support on promotive voice via psychological safety, this is the estimate. You'll see you get a p-value here, and you also get the confidence intervals. This is, again, using the Monte Carlo simulation approach. And basically, if 0 falls between the lower and the upper bound, as it does right here, that would be taken to indicate that there's no significant indirect effect. If it falls outside, then you would interpret the indirect effect as significant. So at least within groups, you can see that there's no significant indirect effect of colleague support on promotive voice. In terms of between, you can see that the indirect effect is negative, which is actually contrary, is actually in the opposite direction of what we had within, and that's potentially reflecting a contextual effect. But it turns out that that indirect effect also is not statistically significant. You'll see down here the test of a contextual effect, and that's just basically calculated by taking the difference between the within and between indirect effects. So that's the difference right there, and a confidence interval for that. So you can see that 0 falls between the lower and the upper bound. So we would not interpret the indirect effects within and between groups to be significantly different, even though kind of descriptively the signs are different. Now, just to show you a couple of other things, if we go back and run the analysis, let's just say that I just wanted the within effects. Then if I go to fix right here, I can just click off of between effects for X and M1, and when I run the analysis, you will find that the between effects no longer are appearing. So you can see down here where it says note, no between effects are specified for either of those two models. And then obviously for the indirect effect, it can only occur within groups, or basically at level 1. I do also want to note that you do have the option to allow slopes to randomly vary. So if I click on random right here, for instance, let's say I want to allow the slope from the mediator at level 1 to Y to randomly vary. I can click on that. If I wanted X to Y or X to a mediator to randomly vary, I could click on those. I'm just going to just stick with one right here and just kind of show you what it looks like. So this is just the previous model, but also adding in a random slope. And you can see under the random effect key, it's got slope, basically for psychological safety to promote a voice. And this would be the variance estimate and the p-value used to indicate significance for that random slope. And you can see it's not statistically significant. Okay, so now let's try a little bit more complex model. So in this case right here, we have two mediators, so that's why we have a 1 and then a 1 right here, and then 2 1s inside the parenthesis here. So in this case, we are going to have colleague support, the effect of colleague support on promotive voice being mediated. We want to test the mediation through psychological safety and felt obligation. But we're also going to add in another covariate in the model, which is tenure. So the way it's set up, we can't directly test the mediation of two X variables at the same time. So we just kind of have to pick one. So I'm going to focus still in on the effect of colleague support on promotive voice. So we have basically, again, all of these variables are measured at level 1. But we are going to test for mediation at level 1 and level 2. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go back up to Analyze, go back to Mixed Models and so forth. And in this case, what we'll do is we will add the felt obligation variable as the second mediator. And we're also going to add in the tenure variable right here as a level 1 covariate. So I'm going to move that over there. Under fixed, we are going to reset these for between effects so I can get that between model. And we'll click on continue, and then under random, I'm going to click off of this option right here. I'm not going to ask for a random slope, and that should take care of things. So I'm going to click off of that, and now we're ready to go. So I am now going to click on OK. So looking at our output, you can see that we have the first model right here. We have psychological safety being regressed onto colleague support and the tenure variables. So you have the within and between effects that are given. So you can see there's colleague support. You can see it's a positive and significant predictor of psychological safety. Tenure is basically a 0 effect with respect to psychological safety. That's both occurring within groups. And then between, you can see that we have a significant positive effect with respect to colleague support again, and tenure not having an effect. With respect to the second mediator, so the first model was basically a regression of the first mediator onto colleague support and tenure. The second model is regressing felt obligation onto those variables. And so right here you can see there's colleague support within that effect, and you can see it's significant. Tenure is not significant. With respect to between, you've got colleague support being significant and tenure, again, not being significant. With respect to the third model, in this case, we have promotive voice being regressed onto colleague support, psychological safety, and felt obligation and tenure. This is within, and then you also have it between as well. So you can see in this case that basically the only predictor within was felt obligation, so that effect right there. And then between, you can see that we have psychological support and felt obligation, both of those being statistically significant. So because we had 3 multi-level regressions that were carried out for this particular analysis, you see that we have level 1 residual estimates where for 3 different models, and then the same for the estimates for the variances of the residuals at level 2. And then there's your random effect key as well for each of those particular models. When we scroll down a little bit further, now you can see under indirect effects, you've got the within indirect effect via each mediator. So the within indirect effect of colleague support on promotive voice via psychological safety, there's the effect right there. You can see that it's not statistically significant. With respect to the indirect effect via felt obligation, you can see that it is statistically significant using either approach, p-values or the confidence interval approach. Between indirect effects, you can see that basically the indirect effect via psychological safety was negative and significant, and via felt obligation it was positive and significant. Down below you can see that we have within indirect effect contrast if we want to compare the indirect effects flowing through the separate mediators. There's also between indirect effect contrast. And then down at the very bottom right here, you have the contextual effect. So basically allowing us to test whether there are significant differences in the indirect effect via each mediator across the levels. So basically taking the level 1 indirect effect and subtracting the level 2 indirect effect for psychological safety, that's the difference. You can see that it would be statistically significant. The difference in the indirect effects via felt obligation, you can see it's 0.4042, but you can see that that would not be statistically significant. So we do see significant difference in the indirect effect across levels with respect to the psychological safety mediator, but not the felt obligation mediator. So that concludes this demonstration, and I appreciate you watching.